Welcome to the Mothers on the Frontline podcast. Mothers on the Frontline is a nonprofit organization founded and run by mothers of children with mental health conditions to promote caregiver healing, caregiver justice, and children's mental health justice through storytelling. Please note that we are sharing our experiences as mothers. Nothing on this podcast should be considered medical or legal advice.
In this episode, we discussed the first principle of Children's Mental Health Justice Framework. In another podcast, we talked about the three principles in the Children's Mental Health Justice Framework. The first one, children's mental illness, injury, and harms are real and deserving of care. Number two, children's mental health justice and caregiver justice are mutually dependent. And three, the lived experiences of children, caregivers, families, and communities matter. It's important to note that the Children's Mental Health Justice Framework approaches child well-being as a social justice issue. This framework works to identify and transform things that harm child, caregiver, and family safety, health, and well-being. And it seeks to prevent these harms from happening in the first place and to heal the damage done to our children, families, communities, minds, bodies, souls, and ancestors. Today, we're delving deeper into the first principle. Children's mental health illness, injury, and harms are real and deserving of care. Dion, what do you have to say about this?
So it's one of the things that really helped me with the work that we're doing and come to really understand that children's mental health and children's mental illness is real and deserving of care. Had to do with my various experiences, or two particular experiences that I had with two of my children who have the same diagnoses. I mean, they both have ADHD, which I probably have ADHD since both my kids have it. So one of my sons was diagnosed with ADHD through a physiological process. So he had developed a inflammatory condition that affects his nerves. So neurological is a form of pediatric MS. And without me even asking, without me even talking about, like, when he was re-entering into school, some of the issues that it would have, I was presented with by the neurologist, not only the opportunity, but as part of the diagnosis process, the school reentry process, and his treatment process, that we should get him tested for ADHD and also depression, right? Because brain inflammation can cause depression. It could cause attention span difficulties. So in this process, for a parent who has a child and has children who have mental illness, I talk about this as glorious, right? Because it was like every step of the way, they were like, we want you to understand why this is happening. We want to make sure that he has all the support that he can get and that we do our best. They had an entire office in the neurological unit, the pediatric neurological unit, that worked in concert with the pediatric psychological unit to create his learning plan. I didn't have to create the learning plan. I didn't have to knock down any doors. They tested him. They said, yeah, there is some issues with brain development and depression. Here's the schedule for counseling. And we're going to do this so it's all integrated. So everything was integrated within the neurological office. So when he came for his checkups, they had already had the paperwork for me. They would hand it to me to write him out of school, because he would have to go to a neurologist, then you have to go to the psychiatrist, and then he would have to go to the therapist. That would be all day. And when I presented all of this to the school, they were like, oh yeah, so he has a diagnosis. This is what's happening. And the school was really supportive. And so that I talk about this as doors, right? So I went through that door. That is where my son was diagnosed with ADHD and depression. Now go to another door, where my younger son was having behavioral issues at school, sensory processing issues. He was acting out. He was leaving, he had this issue with like eloping, because it turned out the second grade classroom was so loud, the teacher would play music that would overload his senses. And that door came with suspensions. It came with him being pushed out of school. It came with us having to actually threaten to sue the school district in order just to get basic testing, right? It came with me talking to the doctor over and over again that every time I'm trying to take my child to second grade, he's screaming, he doesn't want to go, he's resistive, and the doctor's giving me sticker charts, all these behavioral things, and I'm like, there's something else going on. He constantly has a stomach ache. I was told that his stomach ache that happened around school was attention seeking, and he just didn't want to go to school. And I kept asking why, and my husband and I were like, why is this happening? What is happening? And every step of the way, we were met with, oh, it's poor parenting. We're not strict enough. That he has issues with self-control and he's attention seeking. And so basically what we have to do is institute sticker charts, a whole bunch of rewards and punishments, and that will bring him in line. I was given BIPs, like I have a binder full of BIPs that every single day.
So what a BIP is?
It's supposed to be a positive behavioral support. So it's a behavioral intervention plan is what a BIP is. And when you have a kiddo who is in primary school, it usually comes with like, it's a really, not even a glorified version of a sticker chart. It's like a hugely punitive sticker chart, because in his BIP, this is all before diagnoses. Like I'm fighting. I'm like, can we get him tested? Can I, I know that this is going on with my older son. Can we get him tested? Can I have some educational testing? He says it's too loud and he can't focus. Can we get some testing there? And it's just push back. No, I am in the behavioral door, right? And so what comes with this BIP is every time he would fidget, the teacher would get a check. Every time he would go through for an hour and he wasn't fidgeting or he didn't talk out of turn or he didn't leave, he would get like a little positive. He hates smiley faces now because he would get a little Mr. Smiley face, and they would count all of these up at the end of the week, and then he would get a reward. And this was supposed to address what turned out to be ADHD, a sensory processing issue. And also he has some issues with OCD that actually we think developed because he was really trying so hard to control his behavior. None of it was attention seeking. None of it was because we were poor parents. He has ADHD, like my other son has ADHD, but I went through the physiological door and I was a good mother in the physiological door. In that door, everybody supported me. They gave me hugs. They were like, let me give you everything you need to support your son. When I went through the behavioral door, we were bad parents, too permissive, too strict, and that my child was actually, without them saying it, a bad child. And they're both brothers. It's a genetic component. They both have the same thing. And I honestly believe that my other son probably had ADHD all along. It was just that the diagnosis happened to come through a physiological, neurological process and not a behavioral one. So,
Thank you for sharing that, because I think this idea of many doors is such an important concept, because we can think of the doors as what is causing the condition, or the doors in terms of how we get to figure it out through the healthcare system. I think both work. And I think it matters because one of the things this part of Principle 1 is about is that mental health conditions in all persons, including children, have various causes. They're just as complicated and range in severity and have different kinds of causes as much as physical conditions, right? They're not different in that way. But what door you enter, the discussion really matters for the reasons you stated. I can give my own story that's similar in the same child on the same day in the same hospital, for instance. My son had 2 appointments, my same son, in the same hospital. At one appointment, he was having earwax removed, and at another, he was having a psychiatry appointment. And in one, there was this kind of constant questioning and suspicion and treatment. And in the other, it was this, and it was just earwax removal. I mean, for the psychiatric care is important for him because it has at points in his life been life-threatening. And there we get not the same kind of treatment for earwax removal. We were being cuddled and how are you? Are you okay? And oh, we're here to support you. And it just is very telling how different we're treated. And I think why this matters is what door you go into the healthcare system and what door you're entering a discussion about what's happening with my child. My child is suffering. That's the key. My child is suffering. What door do we enter the conversation for understanding that suffering? Is it by talking about behavior? Is it by talking about a genetic condition? Is it by talking about a physical condition? All of those really matter. And they matter because they have to do with the stigma that the child receives and how much, and the nature of the mother blame that we receive.
Yes.
So that's important because as we know, for people with mental health conditions of all ages, but this includes children, they do not receive the same kind of physical care because they're often not believed. Once they have a mental health diagnosis, they are not believed. And this has affected my son, who has had physical conditions go undiagnosed for a long period of time because he's not taken seriously when he reports what is going on with his body, which he is the #1 expert on. He knows what he feels in his body. None of us can say what that is. So that's the stigma. But then there's also the mother blame. And so I just wanted to point out, and I know we'll talk more about this in a future episode, but whether we're talking about a history of psychoanalysis and mothers being blamed for their very being and personality, for instance, the idea that autism was caused by refrigerator mothers, mothers being cold in their personality, all the way up to behaviorism models that, the child's having problems because they're not being raised properly in their environment. One of the things we'll talk about in the future is this whole idea of an unfit mother. If you study it, which I am currently doing, it goes back to the same notion of an unfit person. It goes back to a history of eugenics and later euthenics, this idea of the environment, improving the environment to improve the race. It's a very dark history, and we need to talk about this is where mother blame comes from. But for right now, we're going to say at least the door you go into matters for how your child is stigmatized and listened to, and how you as a caregiver, especially a mother, are listened to, because it's the type of mother blame that will be attached to you.
And the other thing I just want to underscore with that is I went through 2 different doors, but I wound up in the same spot.
Yes.
So the psychiatrist is not a different psychiatrist. The pediatric psychiatrist is, and for me, it was literally the same person. And so and they're treating you differently too. So no matter, you can go through many of these doors. I mean, this slide has 5 doors, and we all wind up sitting in the same room. But again, all the factors that you were talking about, Tammy, about stigma, about mother blame, about personalized stigma, racial stigma for our family, and immigration stigma, all of these things have to do with how people actually treat you, even though we're all sitting. So I could be sitting next to somebody and thinking that they're having an equal experience as me, and we are all not coming into we're in the same space, but oftentimes, particularly with children and mental health, we are not coming from the same place. We're not coming through the same door.
No, definitely not. And to that point of, is it real and who is believed? There's also, a gender issue that gets attached to it. My daughter is treated very differently and is believed differently than a boy in the same situation, right? And she is particularly disbelieved, especially when she goes in for the physiological care that she needs. Having diagnoses of depression and or anxiety automatically means that everything she's experiencing in her body is that. And doctors do not believe her. And she has to advocate so strongly for herself in order to just get basic care. So many things
Well, that
up in this.
goes very well into the second one, if y'all don't mind, that children's mental illness and injury and harms are real.
Yes.
And so depression and anxiety and particularly, they're coming from real spaces, and they're not all coming from ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences that really focus on, you know, parental involvement, household, like poverty, which, you know, poverty in the United States, and we'll talk about this some more, but y'all know this is what I study, is also constructed as a moral and individual failing. So to say that children's ACEs comes from poverty without deconstructing the structural nature of poverty essentially says that children's mental illness and harms coming from poverty are the parent's fault, right? It defaults to that without saying that. And so what you're talking about, Angela, is that the harms, like anxiety, is real, right? Yes. And you know, I know with my own daughter, her anxiety comes from a real place, right? And it comes from very real, it comes from losing a parent at a very young age. And that kind of fear of abandonment and the anxiety that comes with that. And to your point about not taking this anxiety seriously, she lost this parent, and this has a genetic component to it. And she's asked, can I have testing and screening and everything? And because she has this history of anxiety, it gets poo-pooed a lot. Like, I have to go in and help her advocate because doctors have told her, well, that's just anxiety. It's not a big deal. And I'm like, this is anxiety that's actually related to family history, that we really need to look at the family history. But because there's a history of anxiety and depression, and because I think it's the gender component of being a young woman, right? That it's kind of like, well, calm down. This is a real thing, right? And so this is why I wanted to bring up the second one and highlight it.
Yeah, I think it's also important when we say that children's mental illness, injury, and harms are real, what we are and what we're not saying. What we're saying is that child suffering is real and it needs to be paid attention to. What I think in a lot of discussions about mental health, especially in disability justice spaces, there's an important conversation about whether we're using a medical model or a social constructionist model or various other kinds of models, which again we will talk about in future episodes. But for today, I just want to take a little piece of it because I think it's important. What we're not saying is that there's something really a deficit that's somehow inherent in the child and that's ontologically real. I'm sorry, I'm a philosopher. That's somehow real in a kind of physical sense or metaphysical sense or something like that. What we're saying is that the suffering is real. And said for the first issue we talked about today, there can be lots of causes for that suffering. It can be structural causes. It can be individual causes that have to do with a physiological condition the child has because of a trauma, all sorts of different things. But it is real and that the suffering's real. One of the things I like to push back, I do appreciate the social constructionist view of mental illness. In this regard, it's very important that it acknowledges how social conditions and structures can debilitate us. And we have experienced that as caregivers, our children have experienced that. And that's a very important component. And I'd like to give an example of, if I may, that shows, though, that it also doesn't capture all of the real suffering our children have. Yeah. So my son, among other things, has Tourette syndrome. And I think it's a great example to be able to show why neither of those frameworks get it all. Okay. It is true, a lot of his suffering and our suffering as a family when we've been out has been because of social conditions, right? Social constructions. When he's having tics, maybe motor tics or verbal tics, and other people give him the side eye or even say things. I've had people come up to me and say, if you parented better, if you would spank your child, he wouldn't behave in this awful way. When he's just ticking, he has no neurological capacity to stop what's happening. This isn't a willful behavior. And so in that case, that is debilitating. That is a social ignorance that's causing harm that then causes further anxiety about going out into public and so forth. But sometimes he has tics, and many people do, that are just physical tics that no one else sees. like a muscle moving underneath his shirt, and no one can see it. So there's no social component. No one else knows it's happening, but that tick is occurring all day long. And we all know, if we've done repetitive motions all day long, how much we'll start having muscular pain. But that's very real pain. And the anxiety that comes with the anticipation of that pain, if the tick starts up again, is also real. Like the anxiety, Deanne, your daughter has, because there's a genetic cancer condition in the family.
Yeah.
And no one wants to pay attention to that. So I just want to note that when we say it's real, we mean the suffering is real.
I want to highlight, because you used, like, there's two things that I think could help with clarification when we're talking about social constructivists and social construction. This idea, it comes from this idea that mental illness, and sometimes we even talk about this in terms of disability, like there's not an actual disability, it's that we have constructed the environment in a way to be disabling, right, and create impairment in people. And so I just want to say, like, this is really the pushback against the idea that mental illness and all of it, it can be made worse sometimes, right? But it's not all because we've constructed the environment. Like with ADHD, we'll say that, like, not we, but there's a notion that, well, this is not actually a problem. Like, there's no real ADHD. It's just that we've taken away recess, and we've taken away all these we've constructed the environment to be so constraining that now kids are acting out, and kids have to have ways to get their energy out. And so this is a pushback, a slight pushback. It's not to say that that isn't happening, but I just wanted to highlight that's what we mean by socially constructed environments.
And I think for the Children's Mental Health Justice Framework, we've always pointed out it's a both and. Like, they're both going on. Yeah.
Yes.
So
yeah, and I think the next thing that we're moving into is this the principle of deserving of care.
Yeah.
Right? Is that what the next one is? And have we kind of finished up on this slide, or do you have some more to say there, Dion?
Yeah, no, I think deserving of care, because one of the things about all of this is that they're all kind of interrelated to one another, right? And so you get to this real, and when we're talking about something that's real, right, then if we accept, right, that harms and mental illness are real, and that there are multiple causes, but they are not necessarily, like, I use the word endogenous because I come from policy, right? So they're not this kind of individual failing, right?
Yeah.
And if we honestly believe that, then necessarily they're deserving of care, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fact that we construct something is not deserving of care, right? And I think about this also because I'm a child of my father had substance abuse disorder, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times this comes up with people who have substance abuse disorders, because we think that people who have substance abuse disorders are not deserving of care, right? That the harms and the injury and the illness itself of substance abuse is an individuated failing. And so it's all about you doing better, and I don't have to care for you. So this last one, if we accept the first parts of it, then we have to accept that they deserve care. And I know y'all have more to say about it, but I just want to, like, push that up.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yes, and deserving of care is, as Deanna was saying, is very important. But deserving, for me, there's something more that comes out of care, right? And we've kind of talked about this a lot, and it's the quality of care, right? Because we experience care, right? And our children have experienced what is said to be care, and that care actually causes harm, or it's non-existent, right? The services that they say, oh yes, here, go to this, you will get this therapy or this support or this assistance, and A, it doesn't exist. B, you're like, who made this up? You know, who like constructed this? It's awful. And or traumatizing. And so for me, when we're delving into all of this, I believe that our children deserve genuinely healing care, right? that is really, really important for me. And I think it's really important for this work, right? That and that care, in order to be genuinely healing, is centering the lived experiences of the children and the families and the communities that are suffering from and experience the mental illnesses, injuries, and harms, and are not just approached from an outside medical and or behavioral model that in many ways pathologizes our families and doesn't treat them as individual human beings who are suffering, right? So in other episodes, we'll get into that a lot more, but that is an important point that I wanted to bring up in this episode. So Tammy, what were you going to add?
Yeah, thank you, Angela. No, that's spot on. And the reason you even have to say genuine healing care is, as you say, so many things masquerade as care that are not. So the fact that something is a service or called a treatment doesn't mean it's care. And so one of the things to think about when someone is suffering or has an unmet need, they need care.
Mhm.
And care is not control. Care is not punishment. Care is not carcerality, removing a person from the community. Care is actually what is needed to help make somebody whole, alleviate their suffering, and bring them back into community. And so those are the things I think have to be standards for anything that is called a treatment or a care. And I think care also is not cure, because cure again goes back to that medical model of something is wrong with the person, where what is wrong is there's a suffering that needs to be alleviated or an unmet need that needs to be met. But we are very different. We have neurodiversity, physical diversity, cultural diversities. Our needs are not all the same. And the needs we have that need to be met might be different from one child to the next. That's okay. It's just care is about meeting those specific needs, not pathologizing them.
I think, and I know we'll get into this in later episodes, but a lot of, in this last one, in terms of desert and not desert, right? And in public policy, and particularly in social policy, there's, a lot of stuff that we do around this, the question of desert, which is whether or not you deserve or you don't deserve. But I think it's important to note, like, a lot of this comes out of Victorian English poor law and this kind of Protestant ethics that was woven into the institutions we inherited, or we either inherited them or we adopted, right? In the United States, that come from English poor law, that says that when we're talking about community, right, that really people who are, suffering, suffering is a result of some sort of individual deficit, and that suffering then needs to be removed. That's the carcerality. That person has to be removed from the community because the community is healthy. And one of the things that we're talking about with genuinely healing care, and one of the things that I think is transformational, not only in what we're talking about, but how people are talking, and I'm thinking about people like Kara Page, who work on healing justice, who are talking about care in general, is that we're talking about care coming and nested in community, right? Mm-hmm. So this is care not being removed from the community, is not caring, and it's harmful not only to the individual who's harmed, but it's harmful to the community that the individual is a part of. And this, and what we're talking about, is the collective, right? And the fact that this is reciprocal, and that is also nested and is interwoven. And for me, this is a natural place to come as a parent, and particularly as a mother, right? And what we talk a lot about is when your child is suffering and you are a mother, you are also suffering. And it doesn't matter. It would not alleviate my suffering. It might mean that I get a night's sleep, but it's not going to alleviate that deep suffering if my child is removed and incarcerated and away from me. I'm still suffering because that child is a part of me, and that child and that person is a part of my community. So that holistic notion is also part of, I think, what we're talking about. And to your point, Angela, about genuinely healing care. It's not just for the individual, but it's also about the community, the family, the culture that individual is a part of.
Yes. Yeah. And you can't and even though a child is an individual, right, and we all have that individual aspect of us, they're not separate from their family, right? They aren't actually separate from their community. And when we're treating what the child is suffering from, or suffering with, or has experienced, all of those aspects need to be addressed. And taking a child, let's say for boarding school, right, like what has been experienced in our family, taking them in to be literally thousands of miles away because care is not available in our state was not a healing experience. And in so many ways, a very, very traumatizing experience that my child and our family will take years to heal from. And we could do many episodes just on the treatment, rehabilitation, boarding schools in and of itself. So I won't belabor that at the moment. And it is one of those social constructions that causes harm, right? And that thinks that removing the child who is suffering is therapeutic, right? And there may be instances, this isn't a blanket statement, where there are people who are helped by it, and there are many children and families that are very, very harmed by it. And what they do there isn't healing.
Well, one of the problems, and again, this will be another future episode, is that we have such a high rate of carcerality in our children's mental health systems because we do not have adequate community care.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you have someone with extreme need that needs a setting that's outside of the home, that setting should be in the community.
Yes.
So you should never have to go out of state to receive care.
Yes.
There are emergency situations where just keeping someone alive might mean that they need to be outside of the home for a day or an extended period of time, but never outside of the community.
Right.
And that's one of the things we'll talk about more in future episodes, but has always been something we argue for, is we need a full continuum of decarcerated care.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Yes.
Yeah. Well,
because our community, our family, our nation, our children deserve a full continuum of decarcerated care.
Yes.
With that, perhaps that's as deep as we can go into Principle 1 today.
yes. Yeah, absolutely.
These many issues in future episodes, these many other issues in future episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great place to stop for today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, ladies. As always,
Thanks.
wonderful talking about this.
You have been listening to the Mothers on the Frontline podcast, copyrighted in 2024 by Mothers on the Frontline. Today's podcast hosts are Deanne Benson-Smith, Tammy Nyden, and Angela Riccio. The music is Old English, written, performed, and recorded by Flame Emoji. For more information on our Children's Mental Health Justice Framework, or to support our work with a tax-deductible donation, go to mothersonthefrontline.org. To listen to more episodes, subscribe to the Mothers on the Frontline podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts.